Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We hereby stand on the government side to impoverish the corruptor. Well, I'm well aware that there are several weak oppositions given by the opposition teams. However, given that corruption is an extraordinary crime, then the prevention of criminal acts of corruption must also be done in extraordinary ways as well. Sometimes, special situations need a special intervention too. It is a legal fact that the imposition of criminal sanctions against a corruption so far has not resulted in a deterrent effect for the perpetrators of corruptions. Even the results of corruption is used to commit another larger crimes in the form of money laundering crimes. That the sanction of impoverishment of the perpetrator of corrupt acts must be made and applied so that the corruptors feel deterrence. Well, although impoverishment can also harm the innocent family of the perpetrators, impoverishment is necessary to give a deterrent effect to the other people who think about the corruptions. In addition, if we think about all the poor victims that was caused by the rampant corruption in this country, punishing those corruptors by impoverishing them is only a small amount compared with the harms that they have caused or that they have done to the society. Next, if we want to talk about whether impoverishing corruptors can be recognized by the law or not, well, there are several articles concerning the provision of criminal sanctions that can be qualified as impoverishment of corruptors. If the threat of criminal sanction is applied seriously, and first, in Article 10, letter B of the Criminal Codes, the additional criminal penalty that may be imposed consists of the revocation of certain right, the deprivations of tangible mobile goods, as well as the payment of the surrogates, the entire payment part of the enterprise as well, and secondly, the provision of Article 10, letter B of the Criminal Code indicates that the absence of the use of administrative sanction and civil sanctions, including impoverishment of corruptions, and based on those two law articles, we know that the impoverishing corruption has been plain in the Indonesian law so far. However, lack of law enforcement as well as inconsistency in decisions making by authorities in the practice of eradicating corruption has led to the crime that the state's financial plundering takes place, and it is still on an ongoing basis so far. And even though corruption eradication commissions that we know as the KPK has stood up and arrested many corruptors, corruption has spread from the center of government to the bureaucracy in the many regions. And for these reasons, we need to strengthen the corruption impoverishment to give the deterrent effect toward the corruptor. Afterward, based on one of the opposition statement that we cannot change, they say that we cannot change people behavior easily, and so that there is no need to give them need to give them a rehabilitations. In this case, I do agree that people cannot be changed easily, and for that reasons, punishment such as imprisonment as well as rehabilitations is the most inefficient punishment for the corruptors. In terms of criminal prisons, there are various weaknesses such as first, degradation of human dignity. Secondly, sometimes imprisonment can produce more criminals than preventing them. And third, which is really important, imprisonment requires a very high social cost as well as money for imprisonment. For these reasons, I will proudly declare that we need to strictly impoverish corruptors so those who stands in power will feel deterrent before they try to corrupt. My name is Bayhaki. I end my speech.
Iya, iya. Besides those fact that my friends already said that corruption threatens our national security, economic equity, global anti-poverty, and development efforts, and democracy itself. But by effectively and preventing and also countering the corruptions, it takes an advantage of transparent and accountable governance. We can secure a critical advantage for Indonesia's democracies. Corruption is a cancer within the body of societies, a disease that eats the public trust and the ability of government to deliver for their citizens. The deleterious effects of corruption impact nearly all aspects of society. It exacerbates social, political, and economic inequality and polarizations, impedes the ability of states to respond to public health crisis or to deliver quality educations, degrades the business environment and economic opportunity, drive conflicts and undermine faith in government. Those that abuse positions of power for private gain steal not just material wealth but human dignity and welfare. It is a legal fact that the impositions of criminal sanctions against corruptors is not so good as my friend said. The perpetrators of corruptions, even the result of the corruption, is used to commit another larger crime in the form of money laundering crimes, criminal act of money laundering. Corruptions, as well as the case like Gayus Tambunan, Akil Mohtar, and Nasaruddin until now is didn't found, and other whose corruption results are used to commit criminal acts of money laundering. Therefore, I argue that the sanctions of impoverishment of the perpetrators of corrupt acts must be made and applied, so that the corruptors feel deterrence due to both economically and financially they are helpless, so that the act of corruptions in the future doesn't continue. Corruption is an extraordinary crime, then the preventions of criminal acts of corruption must also be done in extraordinary ways as well. That law enforcement against corruption should not be done conventionally, but through progressive law enforcement. From the perspective above, the act of impoverishment of corruptors in the future is very important to be applied, as is constituendo. Hence, the impoverishment of corruptor needs to be formulated since a legal norm of positive criminal law in Indonesia has not been regulated. In addition, the defendant in a corruption case is often handed down directly by the court in order to be lighter than the public prosecutor charge, but has a deterrent effect on corruptors, and ultimately draw a strong criticism from the public. The public's expectations on the judge's decision is that decisions given should be able to fulfill the public sense of justice, so that the state assets and the state's finance embezzled in corruptions can be immediately returned to the state for the sake of the people's welfare. Lack of law enforcement and inconsistency in decision making by the authority in practice of the eradicating corruption has led to the crime that state financial plundering takes place on an ongoing basis. For 16 years, KPK, or Corruption Eradication Commission, has stood up and arrested many corruptors, but corruption has spread from the central government to the bureaucracy in the region. In the law number 31 year 1999, it is affirmed that corruption is increasingly widespread, massive, with some increasingly sophisticated modus and operandi, especially with the advance in the field of communications and telecommunication informations today. Based on the theories mentioned above, it can be analyzed that in the criminal and act of corruptions, in general, the criminal sanctions imposed by the judge to the perpetrator of corruptions is a criminal penalty and criminal penalty by cumulative in the act of corruptions, in addition to being punished by imprisonment and or a fine. The defendant may also be sentenced to an additional penalty in the form of replacement payment of the amount equal to the amount of property derived from the proceeds of corruption. Thus, according to Law Number 31 of 1999 on the eradication of corruptions, against the defendant who has been guilty of corruption, the person may be sentenced to imprisonment, the crime of repayment, and the fine. The availability of criminal types in anti-corruption law is not directly proportional to the reductions of corruption itself. As I said before, therefore, impoverishment of corruptors becomes an alternative criminal sanctions in eradicating corrupt crime. Impoverishment of corruptors, according to my latest explanations, in addition to causing financially economically powerless prisoners, will also benefit as follow. Can be used means of preventions, both and special preventions against corruptions, as well as general preventions of society, because it will be made powerless financially or economically by law enforcers. Impoverishment of corruptor is more human compared to imprisonment with all the imprisonment. Money from corruption cannot be used to commit predicate crimes such as money laundering crime. Impoverishment of corruptor is more efficient state financial losses can be recovered faster. More use of non-penal approach or outside of criminal law than penal or criminal law. Given the impoverishment of the corruptor not set in a positive criminal law, then according to this case, in the future it could serve as one additional criminal in the anti-corruption legislations. However, sanctions are put forward in the eradications of corruptions or premium radium, the absence of regulations on impoverishment of corruptors in positive law in Indonesia. It is also one of the factors causing the returns of state assets, and corrupted state finance cannot be fully returned to the state, causing financial loss to the state and the economy of the country. It will disrupt the process of building a nation. So that's why this motion is very good to establish as a new rule in Indonesia. So that's our opinion for these motions. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.